Well, for this week's Think Tank Central, we're joined in studio by I.D.F's Reserve Colonel Atay Shelach, an engineering officer, formerly active in the Yahalom unit, and in Washington is Dr. Aqab Malik, Fullbright scholar at the Elliot School of International Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me for this discussion. Mr. Shelach, I want to begin with you. Of course, the threat of tunnels in Israel is not a new one. When did Israel first face this threat, and how was it dealt with in the early days before we had this very impressive I.D.F technology for the detection and destruction of tunnels?
I think that the first meeting, if I can say meeting, between the human being in Israel and tunnels was in the early 19th of the last century. And then it was related mostly to the crime organization in Gaza and in Egyptian Rafiah. It was related mostly for smugglers, but as you know, there is not much difference between a crime organization and terror organization, and you understand that the solution that serve the crime organization very quick will serve the terror organization. So this was the first step, let's say 1950, and the beginning of 2000, let's say more precisely when the second intifada was started. It seems that the terror organization were adapt that very primitive tools and were build it to something else.
That does bring to the fore the point that the tunnels may be a primitive tool, but still effective. Dr. Malik, I wonder how in Pakistan this problem was dealt with. And as Mr. Shelach was saying, the tunnels can be used for many purposes, and sometimes those purposes evolve over time. What can you tell us about how Pakistan dealt with this issue?
Well, I think most importantly, talking about the tribal areas in the west of Pakistan and how terrorists have been using underground tunnels. But these things have been around since the beginning of the Afghan war in the 1980s, which were built by, at that time, the Mujahideen in Tora Bora. We heard a lot about that in 2001, 2002, with the bombing in Tora Bora and the tunnels there, and how Al-Qaeda and other elements of the Taliban were holed up. But because that border is so porous anyway, overland routes, they weren't so much in use for smuggling or other means at that time. Now that the border fence is going up between Pakistan and Afghanistan, Pakistan has over 900 border posts there now. I think that's going to come to the fore more so while certain terrorist elements who are based in Afghanistan, like the Tariq-e-Taliban in Pakistan, who are based in Khost and Nangarhar province, for example, in Afghanistan, who may want to come over undetected. But this is a laborious way of moving around when you've got such a large porous border. I think it's not so much a problem in Pakistan as it may be in the Middle East, for example, or even for drug smuggling across the US-Mexican border, where there have been many tunnels found here or there. But like you said before, it may be a primitive tool, but it's very much effective. I think in warfare, one of the most effective methods is using primitive tools to utilize against high-tech solutions that the opposition may have. I think it's going to be a laborious, long-term effort on both sides, really.
Mr. Shelach, I want to bring us back to the times we're discussing at this point, Operation Protective Shield still ongoing. We know the I.D.F, and you mentioned some of the technology it's using to detect, destroy these tunnels. Can you walk us through the work being done over this time here in Israel?
Let's say that most of the technology is still classified, so I can't get into the details. But I've got to admit that after the cutting edge took a turn, the operation that occurred in 2014, they put a huge of money and sources, and all of the industries in Israel were involved in developing many kind of solution, and they built some toolbox that helps First of all, at the south in Gaza, and now it's help up in the north. The methodology, the concept of detecting, and how they work, it's not so different between the south and the north. What is different, it's the kind of the ground over there, which is very tough ground, and it's let's say that it's a different time, and it's a different point of view if you're looking for operational view between working on at the south or at the north.
Yes. I wonder, Dr. Malik, when you hear us discussing the situation up north here in Israel, and you're very familiar with it, the Hezbollah tunnels, is the situation viewed or reported in Pakistan at all?
Well, I'm in the States now, so so I don't get much Pakistani news. But I think information is available. I personally check international news sources from around the world anyway. So, but that depends on the person. I think they're so embroiled in their own politics that they tend not to look at what's really going on in the rest of the world, primarily because they don't have many reporters outside in different parts of the world unless there's something very significant. But getting back to the tunnels again, I think the foremost element of detection is going to be intelligence work more than anything else. On the ground, eyes and ears, looking around for suspicious movement of different people or earth, different ideas, different machinery, for example, on both sides of the borders. So I know that these things are probably foremost rather than just technology. Technology is going to come in handy when they've got an idea of a particular location. About where they can detect different things. When it comes to Pakistan and Afghanistan, for example, when there may be terrorists tunneling under the border area, these tunnels have been around for generations, I think, and indicative of something that's quite well known. But I don't think terrorists will be utilized in the same environment. They may use similar methods of digging things out.
Excuse the pun, but thank you very much for helping us dig deeper into this issue this week.